Let us help you reach your peak in retirement. It's time for Your Retirement Elevated.
If you get past one of these, or if you do decide to register for one of these if you don't already, they're very easy to use. You install them in a browser. You don't have to go out of your way necessarily to log into a separate system. It's right there at the top of the screen. You'll see here, in this case, if you have a browser up there, it'll tell you that there's 3 passwords you've stored for this particular site. In many cases, you just click the button, it'll fill your login and password for you and log you right in. So they've made this really easy to use. I highly recommend it if you don't already, and look into them if you haven't. This is another example of how you'll see LastPass down here. You can tap the little LastPass button, it'll fill your password for you on these login screens. Actually, this is a better representation of it, but it'll select for you, fill it right in. You don't even have to retype the password. Phishing, as we talked about, real quick, just show you a couple examples. We've seen a change in phishing here recently, where more advanced attacks are occurring. I wanted to call this out specifically. Phishing has always been one of those things where you'll see these mimicked Netflix or Amazon emails, and you know what to kind of look for with some of them. They're getting more advanced to where if you do click that link, we just had this happen last week with an office that we work with. It actually logged them into a Microsoft login on the backside of this thing. It had a clear screen that they would never see in front of it because it was a malicious link, where behind the scenes, it actually logged them into Microsoft. So it was almost putting a clear panel over a real Microsoft login. And why that's advanced is that even though those users were using 2-factor authentication, they clicked that link, they logged in, it was actually logging into Microsoft on the back end of the system, but they had that clear malicious layer in between. Then asks them for their 2-factor SMS password or whatever it is, the 2-factor. They put that in. They were able to capture the security token that comes back from that site, bypass 2-factor and log into that email account even though it had 2-factor authentication enabled. I know this is advanced and not something that has hit the media yet, but we've caught it now multiple times in the past couple weeks. I bring it up to say it is more critical than ever that you pay very close attention to the links that you click on. Look at the address bars at the top of the screen. If you go to a website, you may see in the link that this says Amazon.com specifically, but when you actually hover over the link, you'll see that it's Amazon.con instead of com. They will change individual letters in a path. So whenever you're logging into anything sensitive, please be very, very careful of what you're logging into, because even 2-factor will not prevent some of these advanced attacks from hitting you. Any questions on that before I move on? Because I know that one was a little more of an advanced attack because you don't see it necessarily and you're logging into a real system. If you don't have any other questions on that one, I mentioned before, monitor credit and breaches. Your systems, like your credit card companies now, will not only monitor your credit, so they'll alert you to, hey, somebody has actually run a credit check on you for a firm, they could be impersonating you. That will usually alert same day within an hour of it occurring. They also monitor, a lot of these sites will monitor, and your credit cards offer them, Credit Karma and some other firms offer them, a dark web monitoring service. So this will tell you, hey, we know this is your email address that you use. We've detected it in a breach with a company that you obviously had an account with, and they'll alert you, if you use this password anywhere else, you should change it. It's another service that will send a follow-up email after this that kind of gives you a couple quick links to look at a few tools. But if you use them, it's a very good resource to know, was my data included in this? It also lets you know as a consumer, if that company, if you see that there's a class action lawsuit, if you suffer any repercussions and you didn't know where it came, it might give you an indication of where that breach occurred and who you can seek some recuperation of those funds from in a lawsuit or a class action suit. A couple services that we want to mention to you, Credit Karma I've mentioned. Privacy Guard is another one that does this. There's LifeLock out there that will lock your credit. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that one. LifeLock will cover a number of things. We had a question that was emailed in through Scott and team that was about, basically breaches of your what was it? It was like your title companies, your deed breaches. And that's another one that you'll see in the media. It's more of a true, what we call social engineering, fraud breach, meaning that somebody is impersonating you, going to a title company, going to a local, state, or county register, and trying to claim they are you, and getting that title switched over. It does occur. We don't see a ton of it during what we would consider a normal life cycle. Where we see it occur is during specific life events. I use that term loosely because it's usually death in a family. It's usually when somebody has passed away, there's a public notification in a newspaper that says this person has passed away. That's an indicator for these malicious actors to go try to conduct this exercise, because they're hoping that whoever passed away does not have a will, a trust, or that kind of legacy planning in place. Their family is usually scrambling to figure out what they had, where they had it, where this stuff may lie, how to handle it. And in that gap, they go to the title companies purporting to be that person with breached information and try to actually leverage it. So I strongly suggest, if you are concerned about this, LifeLock does have a service for that type of protection where they monitor your local registration in deed offices for changes. And much similar to the credit check, where they'll tell you that somebody has made a change or requested a credit check, they will alert you to a change to a deed under your name. It is a paid service. If you don't believe, at some point we have to pick and choose what all services we're paying for, because you could get really down a rabbit hole on all these paid services. If you don't, once or twice a year, you can do it online now. You can check your deeds through an online portal in most cases for a lot of these. If you don't do that, it is definitely, if you have a death in the family, or if you put it in your will or your legacy planning, I would certainly detail out where everything is. The more expedited that process is for your family or with your loved ones, maybe your parents, so on and so forth, that pass away, the more you limit the exposure to this type of breach. Before I move on from that one, since it was a question, does anybody have any specifics on that one? Yeah. So most of these, it's a good question. The question was basically, how do you know that Credit Karma is actually legitimate when it sends these alerts? I thought about this before I came on, and I'm kind of hesitant to say it because you never want to just make people super nervous or drive a distrust in general. The old saying goes, trust but verify, right? In the world of anything you receive digital, you almost have to be don't trust and then verify. By default, you should not trust anything you ever receive digitally. It's unfortunate, it's just the world we live in. In the case of like a Credit Karma alert, it's not telling you it's doing anything. It's alerting you to something that could have potentially happened. So I would say you're not really at risk, but you should immediately verify with whatever it alerted you to. If it was a credit check, reach out and see what the credit check was for. If it was realistic, go to the credit monitoring bureau that it said there was alert, Equifax, TransUnion, run a full report and see if there really was a credit pull. If there was, it'll tell you what firm pulled the credit. Then next step is to go to that firm and say, hey, where did this occur? And do you have any logs of who did this? Or is there any video evidence, et cetera? This is likely fraud. In those cases, and I will cover a little bit of this, then your next step is to engage local law enforcement to file a case. In many cases, they'll defer that to the FBI if it's out of state or out of region. And candidly, nothing's going to happen. This happens too often. The FBI doesn't possibly have the manpower to track it all down in most cases. But the faster that you can get your accounts locked, you can mitigate anything from actually occurring. That time period between them actually getting a new loan under your account, which then you have to clean up, or worse, taking funds, the faster you respond, the more you can eliminate liabilities. Does that answer your question? Any others that I can answer in terms of the deed issue? Yes. So regardless, I actually have mine, whether I wanted it or not, it's automatic with a lot of credit cards now. I believe my Amex and my Discover, my Chase, Amazon card, all of them do an automatic now credit monitoring service. So whether I like it or not, I'm getting these alerts in my email. I never click the emails because I could look at an email, I could scrutinize it, trying to figure out if it's a legitimate link. Why? Just open your browser, type in the address that you know exists or that's already in your bookmarks. Wherever you can, don't click links in emails. Because the odds are at some point we're human beings, we're all gonna get a little complacent and we're gonna click on something we shouldn't have where it is looking like it's normal and it's not. So I highly encourage people to follow the same practices. That is great. Don't click the links if you don't have to. Yep. The ones that we're almost forced to, that are from applications are like Netflix. When you go to do a password reset because you forgot your password at Netflix, it sends you a very specific link that's coded to you to be able to reset your password, and there's no getting away from it. And so, like anything, we pick and choose our battles. We block and tackle where we can, and we try to mitigate risks. But wherever you can, I highly encourage you, don't click on anything in email unless you absolutely have to. And if you receive attachments in email, avoid them like the plague. Unless it's something you absolutely were expecting, do not touch those attachments because that's how people get you to execute a file, install a virus, things of that nature. And really, in most cases, outside of pure curiosity, you know you weren't expecting anything, and chances are it's 99.9% it's gonna be fraud, but that little bit of curiosity gets us sometimes, and we're like, I better make sure. And that's what they rely on, so. Home network. So I talked about backing up data, I talked about updating your system, antivirus software. This is one that's actually kind of unique. I don't know if you've seen in the media, it was pretty popular here recently. We've been going through this tiff with China, Russia especially. It's been going on for years now. Russia actually has one of the main software vendors for security, or at least had existed for the last 30 or so years in Kaspersky, one of the most popular antivirus providers. Well, because of our conflict with Russia, the government now says it is not safe, and they're forcing government agencies to remove Kaspersky antivirus from government systems. At this point in time, with Microsoft and with Apple, unless you're running a crazy device that's outside the norm there, they have built-in antivirus that is perfectly adequate. If you use the controls that are built into those, you do not need to seek out a third-party security service. They're all like overkill, or it's not gonna be any better than what you will get out of the box with those firms in almost every use case. So when you get those advertisements, when you think, hey, maybe I should be doing something better, do not worry about it. It is a sales pitch. As long as you use the built-in mechanisms, you will be just fine. The only other thing I think on there is recovery answers that I would like to call out. In many cases, you'll get the password reset questionnaires. Try to get creative with those wherever you can. It's an annoyance, again, because it's easiest to say, hey, what was my dog's name on the same question for every site you go to. But what happens when one of those companies gets a breach and now that answer is in the wild? Now anybody can go to another institution, get prompted with the same question, and they've got the answer because this firm over here from 10 years ago had the same answer. So it's one of those things you really want to watch out for. Try to use creative or unique answers. And in most cases, most firms are trying to go away from those types of questions anyway, and instead they'll refer to a text message or an email to you to give you a confirmation rather than ask a generic question. Go ahead. It's a great question. So basically, Windows 11 is the newest version of Windows. Mac works the same way. They come out with new versions, and your older devices that are even just a couple years old sometimes won't support the newest version of the operating system. In most cases, you do not need to worry about that for another 5-6 years because Windows 10, or in certain cases like the Mac versions that are previous, if you look it up on their online system, they're still supporting security updates for those previous versions because they know those devices are still gonna be in use. There is a documented life cycle for how long they will support them. Now, if anybody is at home running Windows XP, you got some problems. The old Mac devices that are, the Apple II or something, chances are you're not having much luck with that thing anyway, but you need to get rid of those devices and upgrade. Anymore, most things are going to, and I imagine a lot of you are like me at home, iPad devices are what I refer to a lot of my family, or devices that are Where a full-blown PC or laptop isn't needed necessarily, those devices are a little more straightforward and they're a little more secure because by nature, they don't have all of the same complexities that can be exploited that a full-blown laptop can. So if you're running an iPad, if you stay within the update cycles that Apple pushes for something along those lines, those devices are typically very secure. And it's again, because they're locked down more so than a laptop is by default. A Kindle would be the same thing. Kindles typically are pretty secure out of the box. Now a Kindle runs Android as an operating system. So the difference between an Android phone and an iPhone, right? Android is a little more of the tinkerer's tool. The tech people love Androids because you can do more with them. With that flexibility comes responsibility that you can unlock them to a degree where they can be exploited. There's nothing wrong with them, and I typically say as long as you're updating them and you're staying within the bounds of what was given to you out of the box from the provider, they keep them pretty well locked down. You should feel pretty comfortable with those.
Investment advisory services offered through Elevated Capital Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor.